The blood was still wet when the maid found them. Sharon Tate lay in the living room of 1050 Cielo Drive, 8.5 months pregnant, connected to Jay Sebring by a rope around their necks. The word pig was scrawled across the front door in her blood. It was August 9th, 1969. The summer of love was over. Before that night, Sharon Tate was living the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. 26 years old, married to Roman Polanski, pregnant with their first child. She'd just finished filming The Wrecking Crew and was spending the summer at their rented house in Benedict Canyon while Roman worked on a film in London. The house on Cielo Drive sat tucked into the Hollywood Hills like a secret. Private, secluded. The kind of place where you could throw parties that lasted until dawn, where the pool sparkled under California stars, where beautiful people lived beautiful lives. Sharon had been staying there with friends while Roman was away. Jay Sebring, her former boyfriend turned close friend. Abigail Folger, coffee fortune heiress. Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail's boyfriend. Just 4 friends hanging out on a Saturday night, making dinner plans, living their lives. They had no idea they'd been chosen. Miles away, in the dusty corners of the San Fernando Valley, a different kind of family was gathering. They called themselves just that, the family. But this wasn't blood relation or chosen kinship. This was something else entirely. Charles Manson was 34 years old and had spent more than half his life in reform schools and prisons. Small, wiry, with wild eyes and a voice that could shift from whisper to scream in a heartbeat. He drifted into the Haight-Ashbury scene in 1967, collecting followers like some people collect records. Young women, mostly. Runaways. Lost girls looking for meaning, for family, for someone to tell them who they were supposed to be. Susan Atkins, 19, from San Jose. Patricia Krenwinkel, 21, from Los Angeles. Leslie Van Houten, 19, from Altadena. Smart girls, middle-class girls, girls who should have been in college, not living in the desert, calling a career criminal father. Manson preached about incoming race war he called Helter Skelter, named after the Beatles song. He believed the Beatles were speaking directly to him through their music, sending coded messages about the end times. The war was coming, he said, and they needed to prepare. They needed to be ready. But first, they needed to light the fuse. On the night of August 8th, Manson gathered Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. He sent them to Cielo Drive with Charles Tex Watson, a 23-year-old from Texas who'd become Manson's most devoted male follower. Go to that house where Melcher used to live, Manson told them. Kill everyone there. Make it as gruesome as you can. Terry Melcher was Doris Day's son, a record producer who had once lived at 1050 Cielo Drive. Manson had met him there, hoping to get a recording contract. It never happened. Now Melcher was gone, and Sharon Tate lived in his place. But to Manson, that didn't matter. The house itself was the target. Whoever happened to be inside was just collateral damage. They drove up to Benedict Canyon just after midnight. Watson cut the phone lines. They climbed the gate. Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old who'd been visiting the caretaker, was leaving in his car when they found him. Watson shot him 4 times. That was just the beginning. Inside the house, Sharon and her friends were getting ready for bed. Jay had decided to sleep on the couch. Abigail was reading in her room. Wojciech was dozing on a chair in the living room. They never stood a chance. Watson burst through the front door, gun in hand. "I'm the devil," he announced, "and I'm here to do the devil's business." What happened next was butchery dressed up as revolution. Sharon Tate begged for her baby's life. Susan Atkins stabbed her 16 times, later bragging to cellmates that Sharon had called out for her mother as she died. The killers wrote "pig" on the front door in Sharon's blood and drove back to Spawn Ranch, the old movie set where the family lived. They'd done what Charlie asked. They'd started Helter Skelter. Except the world didn't end. The race war didn't begin. The next morning, the murders were front-page news, but the reaction wasn't what Manson expected. Fear, yes. Horror, absolutely. But not the chaos he'd prophesied. So the next night, they did it again. Leno and Rosemary LaBianca lived in Los Feliz, about 10 miles from Cielo Drive. They were coming home from a weekend trip when Manson, Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten broke into their house. This time, Manson tied them up himself, before leaving Watson and the women to finish the job. They carved war into Leno's stomach. They left carving forks sticking out of his body. They wrote "Helter Skelter" on the refrigerator in blood, misspelling their own manifesto. 2 nights, 7 people dead, and still the world didn't end. For months, the LAPD chased leads that went nowhere. The Tate and LaBianca investigations weren't even connected. Different detectives, different theories. Some cops thought it was a drug deal gone wrong. Others suspected Sharon's husband, Roman Polanski. The idea that a hippie cult had committed random acts of ultra-violence seemed too bizarre to consider. Meanwhile, the family kept living their strange existence at Spawn Ranch. They took hallucinogens and had group sex and listened to Charlie's rambling lectures about the Beatles and the Bible and the coming apocalypse. Some members drifted away. Others arrived to take their place. Susan Atkins couldn't keep quiet. In jail, on an unrelated charge, she started bragging to her cellmates about the murders, about how Sharon Tate had begged for her life, about how she'd wanted to cut the baby out of Sharon's womb and take it with them. Her cellmate went to the police. The arrests came in December. One by one, the family members were picked up. Manson himself was found hiding under a bathroom sink at Barker Ranch in Death Valley, covered in dust and delusion. The trial began in June 1970 and turned into a circus. Manson carved an X into his forehead, claiming he'd X'd himself out of society. His followers did the same, shaving their heads, chanting outside the courthouse. He wasn't just defending himself, he was performing. The prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, had to prove something that seemed impossible, that Charles Manson had orchestrated murders he didn't physically commit, that his words alone could drive others to kill. These defendants are not hippies, Bugliosi told the jury. They are killers. The girls, because that's what they were, girls barely out of their teens, testified with eerie calm about stabbing strangers to death. They showed no remorse, no recognition that they'd done anything wrong. They'd been following Charlie's orders. They'd been starting a revolution. Linda Kasabian, who'd driven to Cielo Drive but hadn't participated in the murders, became the prosecution's star witness. She broke down on the stand describing what she'd seen: the screaming, the blood, the complete absence of mercy. In January 1971, all 4 defendants were found guilty of first-degree murder. They were sentenced to death, though California's moratorium on capital punishment meant they'd serve life sentences instead. Manson spent the rest of his life in prison, giving rambling interviews and collecting pen pals and marriage proposals from people who saw something romantic in his madness. He died in 2017, still insisting he'd never told anyone to kill anyone, just to do what was necessary. The women are still in prison. Patricia Krenwinkel has been denied parole 14 times. Leslie Van Houten was finally released in 2023 after serving more than 50 years. Susan Atkins died in prison in 2009, her final parole request denied. Charles Watson found religion behind bars and became a minister. He's been denied parole 17 times. People still drive by 150 Cielo Drive, though the original house was torn down years ago. They're looking for something, a glimpse of evil, maybe, or just trying to understand how paradise could turn into hell in a single night. Sharon Tate never got to meet her son. She never got to see how her story would be told and retold, mythologized and exploited, turned into movies and books, and endless speculation about what it all meant. The summer of love was over, but the questions it left behind are still with us. How do you measure the space between influence and action, between preaching violence and pulling the trigger, between being lost and being lost forever? The blood on Cielo Drive has long since been washed away. But some stains, once they set in, never really fade.